Why would a man willingly abandon morality, reject religion, and embrace deceit, and still be remembered as one of history's greatest thinkers? Niccolò Machiavelli is often cast as history's first true villain, not because he committed atrocities himself, but because he dared to say out loud what most people only think in silence, that in the pursuit of power, goodness is optional. He wasn't just challenging ethics, he was dismantling them at the foundation. In place of morality, Machiavelli built a new political philosophy, one rooted in ruthlessness, strategic deceit, and emotional detachment. Unlike his contemporaries, Machiavelli didn't pretend that politics was about justice or virtue. He saw it as a battlefield where compassion could get you killed, where honesty could be exploited, and where idealism was a weakness, not a strength. In a world filled with shifting alliances, corrupt leaders, and relentless ambition, he asked one question: what actually works? This is what makes Machiavelli so controversial and so powerful. He forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that ethical leadership and effective leadership don't always align. He understood that fear lasts longer than love, and that people often betray their values when power is within reach. To many, this made him dangerous. To others, a genius. But one thing is certain, Machiavelli didn't care about being good. He cared about being real. And in that realism, he crafted a philosophy that continues to haunt the world of politics, business, and power today. Niccolò Machiavelli was not born into stability. He was forged in the fire of chaos. To understand his brutal philosophy, you must first understand the world that shaped him. Florence in the late 15th century was, in theory, a republic. But in practice, it was a whirlwind of corruption, betrayal, and political manipulation. It was a city where power changed hands as often as the seasons, where elections were rigged through backroom deals, and where the people in charge were often just pawns of the powerful Medici family. Machiavelli was born in 1469 to a once prominent family. Though technically noble, his father was the poorest of their lineage, an unemployed former lawyer with connections but no real influence. His mother, a devout writer of religious poetry, was the moral contrast in Machiavelli's childhood. This tension between faith and realism, between divine idealism and political failure, would later define his thinking. But more than anything, it was the spectacle of violence and betrayal that left its mark on young Machiavelli. When he was just a boy, he watched as political dissenters were hung upside down from Florence's government building, their bodies left to rot for weeks. It was not just a warning, it was a lesson. In politics, there is no forgiveness, only dominance and defeat. These events weren't anomalies, they were the norm in Machiavelli's Italy. Neighboring states waged endless wars. Mercenaries switched sides with no allegiance. Alliances were made and broken overnight. Power wasn't earned through goodness. It was taken through cunning, ruthlessness, and deception. Machiavelli saw this. He didn't romanticize it. He recorded it, absorbed it, and eventually turned it into doctrine. He learned young that appearances lied, that morality could be manipulated, and that the difference between a hero and a traitor was often just timing and narrative. In this world, idealists were destroyed. Realists, even dark ones, survived. This chaotic, unforgiving landscape would become the silent backbone of his most famous work, The Prince, a book that reflects not the world he hoped for, but the world he knew all too well. At the heart of Machiavelli's legacy lies a single incendiary book, The Prince. Written in exile after being tortured and cast out by the Medici family, The Prince was not just a political guide, it was a philosophical rebellion. While most political theorists of his time clung to ideals of virtue, justice, and morality, Machiavelli took a razor to them all. In this small but explosive text, he declared that the goal of leadership was not to be good, but to be effective. He didn't say virtue was useless. He said it was unreliable. Power, he argued, is not sustained by ideals. It's sustained by perception, control, and adaptability. The truly successful ruler isn't bound by traditional ethics, but by a single principle: survive and dominate. Machiavelli made a bold distinction. Politics and morality are not married. They are, in fact, often incompatible. A ruler who insists on always being honest, compassionate, or just will eventually be crushed by those who are not. The Prince wasn't a manual for monsters. It was a survival guide for leaders in a brutal, unforgiving world. More controversially, Machiavelli argued that it's better to be feared than loved, if you can't be both. Because love fades, fear lingers. And while people may betray those they love, they rarely challenge those they fear. This idea shattered centuries of idealism and still makes us uncomfortable today. But in its rawness, it also told a hard truth. Goodness is admirable, but it does not guarantee success. And in power, success is often the only currency that matters. If Machiavelli had a poster child for his philosophy, it would be Cesare Borgia, a man born in scandal, baptized in blood, and remembered as one of the most ruthless tacticians in Italian history. Borgia, the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI, was not bound by tradition, faith, or even loyalty. He was bound only by one thing: results. And it was precisely this single-minded pursuit of power that led Machiavelli to elevate him as the ideal prince, not because he was moral, but because he was effective. Machiavelli watched Borgia closely. In 1502, Borgia conquered the city of Cesena and installed his enforcer, Ramiro de Lorqua, to bring order through any means necessary. What followed was a campaign of brutal repression, beheadings in the town square, property seizures, executions in front of families. Peace, Borgia believed, was born from fear, and yet, just as public hatred reached its peak, Borgia struck again, not at the people, but at his own man. One morning, Lorqua's mutilated body was found in the town square, split in two, his head impaled on a pike. Borgia blamed everything on him. He told the citizens he had been unaware of Lorqua's cruelty, that he had stepped in to deliver justice. The people, horrified but relieved, praised Borgia as their savior. To Machiavelli, this was genius, brutal, cold, calculated, but brilliant. Borgia used cruelty not recklessly, but strategically, and then cleansed himself of the consequences by sacrificing the very man who executed his will. He was feared, but not hated. He was ruthless, but respected. And above all, he maintained control. Through Borgia, Machiavelli revealed a central truth. Sometimes leadership is not about kindness or integrity. It's about timing, deception, and the mastery of fear. In a world full of betrayal, Borgia didn't wait to be stabbed in the back. He cut first, and with terrifying precision. Machiavelli's most quoted line is also his most chilling. It is much safer to be feared than loved. In a world that idealizes kindness and emotional connection, this idea can feel brutal, almost inhuman. But to Machiavelli, it wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. He understood something that many leaders still struggle to admit. Love is fragile. Fear is reliable. Love can be lost. People change their minds. They turn on you the moment affection fades or loyalty becomes inconvenient. But fear roots itself in the psyche. It alters behavior, influences decision-making, and, when applied carefully, keeps people in line. That's not to say Machiavelli encouraged sadism. He explicitly warned against becoming hated. Hatred breeds revolt. It breeds assassination. A leader who is feared may be obeyed, but a leader who is hated will be hunted. The key, he wrote, was to strike fast and clean. If cruelty is necessary, it must be done all at once, then never again. Leave no lingering pain, offer calm after the storm. Rule with a firm hand, but always with purpose, not pleasure. This insight forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. People are not as loyal as they claim. They lie. They flatter. They follow only when it serves them. And so, a leader must build control, not through sentiment, but through strategy. If love is available, take it. But if it comes at the cost of authority, choose fear. Because love is emotional, fear is structural. Machiavelli knew that the world doesn't reward softness. It rewards those who master human nature, not deny it. To lead effectively, you must inspire enough admiration to be followed, but enough fear to never be challenged. In the cold logic of power, love is optional. Fear is foundational. This is the heart of Machiavellian leadership. Emotionally detached, strategically engaged, and always one step ahead of human unpredictability. Machiavelli was never interested in illusions of integrity. He was interested in power. And in The Prince, he makes one thing painfully clear. Truth is less important than appearance. In a world where few people see the reality behind the curtain, What matters most is what they believe. A leader, he says, does not need to be virtuous, but must appear virtuous. That illusion is not deception in the eyes of Machiavelli, it's survival. The public doesn't witness your late-night decisions, the pressure of war councils, or the ugly compromises you're forced to make. All they see is the image you present, and most will judge you not on reality, but on optics, tone, symbolism, and surface-level gestures. So why waste time trying to be morally perfect when all that matters is looking like you are? This isn't an argument for empty lies. It's a blueprint for psychological leadership. Machiavelli believed that if you must lie to protect your power, lie. If you must break a promise to adjust to new circumstances, do it. He didn't see these as moral failures. He saw them as necessary tools in a world full of manipulators, backstabbers, and opportunists. If your enemies are willing to deceive, and you are not, you've already lost the game. But here's the twist. The most successful leader still speaks in the language of virtue. You talk about justice, you praise loyalty, you promise compassion, all while moving behind the scenes with calculation and control. Why? Because the public craves a hero. And even if you're not one, they will believe you are if you master the art of appearances. For Machiavelli, perception is power, and the greatest danger lies in being honest in a dishonest world. The wise leader, he says, learns to play both roles, the lion when strength is needed and the fox when strategy demands it. Appearances don't just matter. They are the stage on which power is won or lost. In the game of life and leadership, what determines success, your skill, or your luck? For Machiavelli, the answer wasn't either or, it was both. In The Prince, he introduces two forces that shape every human journey, virtù and fortuna. But these words don't mean what they seem. Virtù isn't virtue in the moral sense. It's not about being good, it's about being capable. For Machiavelli, virtù is the strength of character, the willpower, the cunning, the boldness, the adaptability that allows a person to rise above chaos. It's the inner force that pushes someone to act decisively, shape outcomes, and dominate when others hesitate. Then there is fortuna, fortune, fate, the unpredictable river of life. Machiavelli compares it to a wild, flooding stream. Left unchecked, it can destroy entire villages. But if prepared for, if dammed, redirected, or contained, it can be managed. Fortuna is what you can't control, the economy collapsing, a war breaking out, an unexpected betrayal. But virtù is how you respond when the flood hits. Will you drown or will you stand? This relationship between skill and luck is central to Machiavelli's philosophy. He believed that luck controls half of what happens to us, but the other half is entirely ours. It's what we do with the time, the tools, and the opportunities we've been given. And in that half, greatness is forged. A leader who succeeds one day may fail the next, not because they have changed, but because the world has. That's why virtù isn't static, it's adaptive. What worked yesterday might fail tomorrow, and those who cling to old methods, to outdated values or predictable routines are doomed to be swept away by fortuna's next flood. Machiavelli didn't romanticize control. He understood that unpredictability is a permanent feature of life, but he offered an empowering truth. You don't have to be lucky to be powerful. You just have to be prepared. You must sharpen your instincts, build inner strength, and never grow complacent. Success, in the Machiavellian sense, belongs not to the lucky, but to the bold, the flexible, and the ruthlessly aware. When fortuna rises, virtù is the dam. And those who master both survive the storm, not because they hoped to, but because they were ready for it. Beneath the polished masks of civilization, Machiavelli believed there lived something darker, something ancient, a beast. In his view, no matter how refined we appear, every human being is driven by desire, fear, and self-interest. And for leaders, this truth is not just important, it's essential. Machiavelli wasn't interested in fantasies of human goodness. He believed that if you build your leadership on the assumption that people are naturally honest, loyal, or noble, you are building on sand. People lie, they flatter, they cheat, not always out of malice, but out of instinct. And because of this, the effective leader must learn not to fight human nature, but to work with it. He writes that a ruler must learn to be both the lion and the fox. The lion represents raw power, strength, dominance, the ability to strike and inspire fear. But the lion alone isn't enough. Lions fall into traps. They are too visible, too blunt. That's where the fox comes in. The fox survives by being cunning, adaptable, aware of snares before they snap shut. The great leader, then, must embody both, the lion's force and the fox's deception. But Machiavelli didn't stop at metaphors. He challenged something deeper, our very belief that we must be purely ethical to be good leaders. He saw that life is rarely that clean. In a corrupt world, to survive with your ideals fully intact is to live in denial. That doesn't mean we abandon all ethics, but it does mean we don't become blind to what's required when navigating a world where others aren't playing by the same rules. Modern psychology would later echo this idea. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the primal part of us that we repress. But Machiavelli wasn't afraid of the shadow. He saw it as necessary, not something to suppress, but something to master. To him, leadership meant recognizing that part of you that can fight, deceive, outwit, and survive, and not denying it, but controlling it. Because those who pretend it doesn't exist are the ones who fall hardest when they are betrayed, outmaneuvered, or overpowered. To lead in the real world, you must understand human nature, not just in others, but in yourself. You must become both the mirror and the mask, the beast and the strategist. That's the Machiavellian path to lasting power. We all want to believe that the world rewards goodness, that if we act with integrity, fairness, and honesty, life will somehow return that energy. But Machiavelli didn't believe that, not because he was cynical, but because he was paying attention. He saw a brutal truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. There is a massive, unbridgeable gap between how the world should be and how it really is. In The Prince, he doesn't sugarcoat it. He says directly, if you try to lead or live according to the way things ought to be, you will be crushed by the way things actually work. That's not pessimism, it's strategy. Because when you stop confusing the ideal for the real, you finally begin to understand the game you're in. Machiavelli watched his world fall apart, not because the ideas were bad, but because they were naive. Leaders who tried to be virtuous were outmaneuvered by those who were ruthless. Governments that relied on goodwill were eaten alive by systems built on fear, loyalty, and manipulation. And individuals who refused to adapt were simply swept aside. So what do you do with this knowledge? You stop expecting the world to reward you for being good, and you start building the kind of strength that can survive reality. You stop living as though you are in a world that should exist and start mastering the world that does. This doesn't mean abandoning all ethics. It means recognizing that ethics alone aren't enough. They must be combined with insight, strategy, and a willingness to act when things get ugly. Because in the world Machiavelli knew, and the world we still live in, power doesn't care about your intentions. It only responds to outcomes. This is the core of Machiavellian realism. The world is not a moral equation, it's a battlefield of perception, leverage, and adaptability. The people who win are not always the ones with the best hearts, but the ones who know how to protect them without exposing it. You don't have to become ruthless, but if you want to survive, you do have to stop being naive. That's not giving up on goodness. That's giving it a fighting chance. The great irony of Niccolò Machiavelli's life is that for all his brilliance, all his strategy, all his ruthless political insight, he failed to rise to power himself. The man who wrote The Prince, perhaps the most infamous manual on political domination ever written, spent most of his later years in exile, unemployed, and forgotten by the very leaders he hoped to impress. After being tortured by the Medici family, Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a gift, a political olive branch to Lorenzo de' Medici, the man who had once imprisoned him. It was meant to be persuasive, perhaps even redemptive. But it failed. There's no evidence Lorenzo ever read the book. And even if he did, Machiavelli's name, so deeply associated with manipulation, deceit, and amoral strategy, was likely more of a liability than an asset. In the end, The Prince didn't win Machiavelli a political comeback. It made him a symbol of everything people fear about power. He became a pariah. The book was banned by the Catholic Church. His name became synonymous with evil. And while he did find success writing comedic plays and satirical works, his dream of political influence died quietly, long before his philosophy exploded into the modern imagination. But perhaps that's what makes his legacy so haunting. Machiavelli wasn't speaking from the throne, he was writing from the sidelines. His ideas weren't born from glory, but from watching the game and realizing why good people kept losing. He was the rejected advisor, the political failure who saw the truth too clearly and spoke it too loudly. In many ways, Machiavelli sacrificed himself to tell the truth. He published ideas so raw, so unapologetically dark, that no ruler wanted them spoken aloud. Yet centuries later, politicians, CEOs, generals, even revolutionaries have quietly followed his advice. His name may be feared, even hated, but his insight remains disturbingly relevant. The tragedy is that Machiavelli understood power perfectly, but power never embraced him back. His life serves as a warning and a mirror, that telling the truth about how the world works may earn you insight, but it may also cost you everything. And that perhaps is the most Machiavellian outcome of all. In a world that often rewards illusion over integrity, Machiavelli forces us to confront a hard truth. Being good is not always enough, being prepared is. His message isn't a call to cruelty, but a call to awareness. You don't have to lie, cheat, or betray to succeed, but you do need to understand that others might and plan accordingly. Machiavelli teaches us that survival and success require more than virtue. They require clarity. Clarity about human nature, about systems of power, and about the fact that people don't always act out of love. They act out of fear, desire, and self-preservation. In this way, his philosophy is not about abandoning your ethics, but about protecting them with strategy. Whether you're leading a team, building a career, or simply navigating relationships, the lesson is this: be the lion when strength is needed, be the fox when danger is near, but never be naive. Respect kindness, but don't expect it from everyone. Adapt. Think ahead. Guard your boundaries and always remember the world may not reward goodness, but it never forgets power paired with wisdom. That balance is where real influence and real freedom begins.